Howdy folks, Rain of Galen here, and welcome to another episode of Rain Makes Stuff. Today I'm gonna be making, I'm gonna come back to that. But in the meantime, I'm gonna try to make Geno from Super Mario RPG as a doll in the style of an antique 19th century strong doll. So without any further ado, let's get crafting. I plan on 3D printing the body of the doll in wood filament, which is actually a blend of PLA and wood dust. That should give the doll an appearance that is similar to wood once sanded and sealed. So I'm back in Tinkercad today to model the body, starting with a basic head shape and moving into a simple torso. I'm solely using the basic and community shapes available within Tinkercad for this model. The thing I like most about Tinkercad, other than the variety of shapes, is that I can switch any positive shape to a negative one, which means I don't have to spend a ton of time in CAD software modeling all of the nooks and crannies. Instead, like you see here, I can make a spherical divot in another sphere, then use that to smooth the surface after using this other banana shape for his sternum area. After hollowing out the chest cavity, I'll add his neck, which I'll model similarly to how a Barbie's neck looks, with the head sitting just over the top of it. Since this will be a strong doll with rubber bands running through it, I'll need to separate the head to add a flat surface for the hook to attach to inside. Then I'll glue the top of the head back on once everything is printed. However, the hook I modeled here doesn't really print well in wood filament and becomes quite brittle, so I'll end up replacing all of the hooks shown in this video with metal ones after everything is printed. After making holes for the arms and legs to attach through, I'll model his limbs. I'm going for some very slight articulation in his knees, so I'll have to make the thigh area hollow to allow another band to pass through. His lower legs will need some big old boots, so I'll model those out of some cylinders and stretched out elongated circle things. Moving on to his arms. I don't need him to have jointed elbows, so I'm creating a false joint to match the official art before modeling some little sausages for his fingers. Next, it's time to give our friend a face. I'm going to use flattened cylinders to etch the vertical lines into his face, along with hollow cylinders for the outlines of his eyes. Once I have all of his facial features in place, I'll move everything to the surface of the modeling area and then export for printing. Now it's time to break out the sandpaper, my favorite part.
Really? No, not really.
While I sand until the end of time, this would be a great time to mention my Patreon page. I post exclusive updates and sneak peeks on there, and your support makes it possible for me to afford craft materials like wood, filament, and sandpaper. Once we have a big enough community there, I'll also be adding a Discord channel, so be sure to check it out using the link at the top right. Now that all the sanding is done, it's time to start assembling. Here you can see where I replaced the hook inside the head with a metal jewelry hook instead, because the other one snapped off. Next, we'll use our trusty super glue to glue his head together, as well as his torso, which I divvied into two pieces before printing to make it easier to print with fewer supports. One more final round of sanding to hide the seams, and we're ready to move on to painting. This is some leftover reddish brown from the Epona statue I made several months ago, which should do nicely for his shoes. I'll also coat all the fleshy parts in some water-based polyacrylic to pull out that nice wood tone and give it a satin sheen. The smaller parts are held in place by tacks and inverted tape, while the others I decided to make into finger puppets while coating them. So it's a really good thing this stuff washes off with soap and water. Next, I'll paint his eyes very, very carefully. He'll look extremely surprised until he has his hat, so for now enjoy him staring into your soul. A little more polyacrylic to protect the paint layers, and he's ready for banding. Since all the hooks broke off immediately after printing, I'm adding some more of those gold jewelry hooks where they used to be. Then, with the help of some crafting wire, I'll thread the first rubber band through the hook inside his head. This was not a frustrating experience at all. I found this little hooky tool in a box somewhere, and I have no idea what it's supposed to be used for, but it sure turned out to be extremely helpful in pulling rubber bands through the holes in the doll's head and torso. Now to attach one end of the rubber band to the hook on the arm, Then we pull the other end of the rubber band through the neck and attach it to the other arm. And it looks like we have some success so far with everything working out exactly as we planned. Okay, good as new. Now we're ready to attach his legs, this time running shorter rubber bands from the arm to the opposite leg. This first band will run through the hole in the upper leg to the hook in the bottom leg to give us that small amount of articulation we want. So far so good. Now to repeat the process on the other side of the doll, but I decided to hold it just out of frame so you couldn't see any of that.
Please don't go. It's great having you here.
Once we attach this band to the last hook on his other leg, we'll have our very own naked Geno doll.
Good grief, he's naked!
Okay, we should probably fix that as quickly as possible, beginning with a quick pattern cut out of paper so we don't waste any fabric. I wanted to go with felt for Geno's cape and hat because the thickness and rigidness seemed like a great fit for a doll you'd find inside a 90s video game. Just go with it. After cutting out his cape, I'll double check the sizing before cutting out the next piece. Since the inside and outsides of his cape are different colors, I'll have to use this pattern twice, once for the blue and again for the yellow. The two pieces don't have to match up perfectly since I can trim any excess later. Next, I'll glue a strip of yellow to the neckline of the cape to create a color that I can add detail to later once he's wearing it. Now, what to use as a fastener? Ah yes, the string I picked up from the middle of a parking lot should do nicely. Just need to find a bit that's undamaged and color it up with some acrylic paint. The first coat is to stiffen the string and give it some uniform color, then another coat to match the color to the felt. Once the paint is dry, I'll mark where the fastener will attach to the cloak before poking holes in the cloak with a bead reamer. Because, well, that's the pointiest thing that I had in arm's reach. Once again, I'll call on my trusty craft wire to help me thread the string through the holes I made, then tie a knot on the underside to hold the string in place. Finally, I'll repeat the same process on the other side, but I'll leave it unknotted until I put the cape on the doll so I can get the length of the string just right before knotting it off. The last step for Geno's cloak is to trim the bottom edges and to add the detail to his collar. I'll roughly mark where the frayed edges go before trimming unnecessarily close to his face.
You have to be careful with scissors.
With Geno's cape finally finished, it's time to make his hat. I avoided sewing on the cape entirely, but there's just no way around sewing his hat together by hand. I'm starting out with a rough dome shape for the front of his hat, then I'll add another strip of felt for the back of the hat. I'm kinda winging the shape based on how my brain imagines the hat would look when it was flattened out. Once it's all sewn together, I'll flip the hat right side out and use my fingernail to scrape the seams until they're a little bit less visible. Once I'm happy with the overall shape, I'll mark where Geno's ears are and cut a small groove in the sides of the hat so it rests neatly over them. A dab of hot glue to hold the hat in place, and we're down to the finishing touches, starting with the yellow bow on the front of his hat, which we'll cut from leftover felt and hot glue into place. And finally, the little red curly things that I can only guess are supposed to be some kind of weird alien hair tendrils. I'll spread some quick-drying tacky glue onto a strip of red felt, then curl it and hold it into place with some pins until it dries. Now, what do these shapes remind me of? Once both of my mutilated felt Yoshi tongues are dry, I'll remove the pins, trim off any excess, and hot glue them to Geno's hat. And finally, our Geno doll is done and ready for his hero shot.
I am super happy with how he came out, and hopefully you are too. If you are, be sure to like and subscribe. The reason it took me a little longer to get this video out to you was not only because, you know, that thing we're not going to talk about, but also my work is somewhat seasonal. So during the warmer months, I'm going to be working a little more so that I can afford craft materials, so I can make videos. Another thing, Tears of the Kingdom is coming out. So apologize ahead of time for however long it takes me to get my next video out. So that's it. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my Patreon, link in the description, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if that's your thing. Here's a video you can watch. There's stuff to click on. Just saying. I don't know what to do with my arms.